Right. I have no idea how this is gonna work, but I'm gonna try out reading a book on stream. Obviously you won't be able to see me reading it, but I have the book here. It's a pretty horrific one. From Shaun, Hutson, Relics. I've got the atmosphere ready, I think. And I know the first half of this book is really fucked up, so I'm gonna try and get through it. But I know this horror book has an effect on me, so it's gonna be a fun read. It's the atmosphere is pretty good. Don't think you can tell, but I'm fucking nervous. Got a nice little thing here. Nice background. Yeah, I'm just using a 10-hour thing. Currently in a field digging a hole. This book's pretty fucked up. Wow. That sounds really fucked. Yeah, I'll get into it. Right. Depends how much you like horror books, to be honest. This one's a bit... yeah. I mean, seriously, the first half, this first chapter is not good. It is, it's very not safe for work. It's fine for, Twitch, because I'm, well, reading it. Not awful, but need to, you know, warning first. Before I go into this, this book is really fucked up. Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna read the first half for like I think after chapter 1 it should be fine. Yeah. Literally, yeah. It's just the intro. So, you start reading it now. Chapter 1. I felt cold against her flesh, as if some icy finger were tracing a pattern over her skin. the girl felt the blade being drawn softly across her cheek. The point brushed her lips, nudging against them for a moment as if seeking access to the warm moistness beyond. She opened her mouth slightly, and for fleeting seconds she tasted steel, and the knife was gone. The girl's eyes were closed, but as she felt the point gliding down towards the hollow of her throat, she finally allowed herself to gaze upon the one who wielded the blade. He was almost invisible in the darkness. She knew that, like her, he was naked, as were the others who stood close by, little more than pale outlines beneath the dense canopy of trees, whose gnarled branches, twisted and curled together, rattled by the chill October wind, which whistled tunelessly through the wood. It also ruffled the girl's long, dark hair, causing the silky tresses to writhe like reptilian tails. She was barely 17, but her body was shapely and bellied her youth. Her breasts in particular seemed overdeveloped, the nipples coaxed to stiffness by the cold air. She shuddered involuntarily as she felt the knife being moved in a circular pattern around her areola, brushing the bucket skin for a moment before prodding the nipple. This time she felt not only the needle-sharp point of the blade, but the actual cutting edge too, as it rested against the swollen bud of flesh. See what I mean? Oh god, okay. This time she felt not only the needle-sharp point of the blade, but the actual cutting edge too as it rested against the... Okay, yeah. Closed her eyes again, as the same movements were repeated on the other breast. I'm already shaken. This fucking book affects me. The pressure increased and she gritted her teeth, waiting for the cut. But she felt only an icy tickle as the cold blade was drawn between her breasts, down to her navel and then towards the dark bush of hair between her legs. It parted tightly curled down, guided with unfaltering skill by the powerful hand which grasped it. Dead. God, okay. Let out a low sigh, her breath clouding in the cold air as the knife was pressed slightly harder against the moist sensitive area. She opened her legs wider, as if to welcome the blade like some kind of steel. Pee-pee. Gorga. What seemed an eternity remained there, and she exhaled slowly as it was eased aside. Opening her eyes once more, she saw the one who held the blade turn slightly, until he was facing a youth no more than a few months older than herself. He was powerfully built, his head supported by a thick bull neck which he offered willingly to the wielder of the knife. Left an almost invisible white mark as it was pressed against the boy's throat. But after a second the pressure eased and the blade found its way to his chest before plunging deeper towards the limp Boka. He tensed as the cold steel brushed his organ, tracing the course of the thick veins before gliding over his... Can't say that. A moment later it was withdrawn, and now both the girl and the young youth knelt, fallen leaves crunching beneath them. They were close, within arm's length. Suddenly they caught a powerful smell which drifted on the wind. The goat was being led towards them by a rope tied around its neck. Another thick length of hemp had been wrapped tightly around its jaws, so the only sound it could make was a low, mewling deep in its throat. The young couple lay face down on the carpet of leaves as the goat was coaxed between them. It was held firmly by the man who gripped the knife. He now moved behind the creature and straddled it, holding the blade before his chest in one strong hand. With the other he gripped the horns of the goat and yanked its head back so savagely he almost broke its neck. Oh, okay. God, this book is... Okay. Knife flashed forward, tearing through the animal's throat, slicing effortlessly through the muscle and sinew. Huge guts of blood erupted from the massive wound, spraying into the air with the force of a high-pressure hose. That is very specific. Crimson fluid splattered the young people couple as the goat bucked madly between the man's legs. Clouds of vapor rising into the air as the hot blood continued to fountain from the ruptured arteries. From either side, figures approached, all of them men, all of them naked. They lifted the goat into the air, its struggles now becoming more feeble as its life fluid rushed away. Suddenly redoubled its efforts as the knife wielder thrust its blade into its exposed belly, slicing open the fleshy sack with one powerful movement. Wow. Okay, this is... Intestines burst from the wound like the bloody arms of an octopus. Huge thick lengths falling to the ground with a load. Liquid splat. I don't even think I can get past the first half of this fucking book, man. This is really setting off my... Okay, so basically they've killed they killed the goat. I don't want to go. I want to do this. On this one spoke with a single signal has been given. The young couple rolled over to face each other. And now they're fucking inside of the goat's entrails. Man with a knife watched impassively as the frenetic coupling continued. Blood ran down his hand from the blade of the weapon, and he gazed at the crimson droplets in fascination as one fell onto his own rigid parka, staining the head bright red. He chuckled. So much blood. There would be more. He looked around at the other naked bodies in his clearing. Much more blood. Okay, yeah, I'm glad I kind of skipped that because I felt a panic attack coming on. But I had to stop that. There was no way I was going to read the first fucking chapter all the way through. I knew I wouldn't be able to. Okay. Chapter 2. It was getting difficult to breathe inside the tent. The air was full of dust, and the small structure was definitely too small to adequately accommodate 3 people. Nevertheless, Kim Nichols looked on with rapt attention as the piece of hard stone was broken open. A fragment came free as the tracer was worked slowly around it, exposing the encased relic. Charles Cooper picked up the small hammer which lay on the table before him and tapped the wooden end of the tracer. The chisel-like implement shaved off some more stone, and the article within became more easily visible. It looks like a currency bar, Philip, Swanson said quietly, as Cooper prized away the last of the clinging rock. He swept the metal ingot with a small brush and laid the rusted artifact on the white cloth before him. A number of other articles already lay on view there, including coins, a couple of arrowheads, a brooch, a brooch, and a roughly hewn figurine shaped like a phallus. Barker. It's strange, Kim observed, picking up the metal ingot and turning it carefully between her thumb and forefinger. Coins and currency bars used by the same tribe. The Celts usually kept to one form of currency, didn't they? Don't forget, there was trade with other tribes, Cooper reminded her. Atrebates like the Iceni and the Trinovantes would still have traded with Trimete, such as the Brigantes and the Cronovi. He prodded the other slim metal bars with his index finger. A tribe that used both forms of currency, Swanson mused. It must have been a large settlement from the amount of stuff we've found. Then why haven't we found any bones? Asked Kim. But she received no answer from either of her colleagues. Cooper merely sat back in his chair and ran a hand over his hairless head. It was a feature which made him look older than his 35 years. Apart from the tufts over his ears, and at the back of his head he was completely bald. Even his eyebrows appeared to be thinning. His sad, baleful eyes looked as though they had seen all the worries of the world and still carried their imprint. It was Cooper who had initiated this particular dig. Builders working on a nearby site had unearthed a number of artifacts, and Cooper had been notified. He'd ordered an electromagnetic search for the area, which had revealed a large ancient settlement of unknown origin. Subsequent aerial sweeps had confirmed the presence of a Celtic settlement which covered an area almost a quarter of a mile square. Ugh. Kim, who works at the museum 3 miles away in Longfield, the nearest town, had joined the team of 20 archaeologists, and their work had so far revealed a positive treasure trove of relics. A profusion of gold torques and other knit rings had convinced Cooper and his team that this particular site had been home to one of the most powerful Celtic tribes of the time. Slave chains and shackles had also been discovered, suggesting that the tribe, unlike their contemporaries, had used forced labour. Oops. Bones were the only thing missing. Mules, weapons, currency, pottery, and sculpture had all been unearthed during the past 2 weeks. Some of the finds were not only valuable in a financial sense, but priceless in their archaeological worth. All these artifacts confirmed that the settlement had been very large indeed, yet still no physical remains of the tribe who'd created the hoard had been found. Jim looked down at the relics laid out before her. What the hell had happened to the tribe? Chapter 3. The air was turning blue. A thick haze of diesel fumes hung over the men and machines like a man-made fog bank. Thick and noxious, the roar of powerful engines mingled with the screech of caterpillar tracks as a number of large earth movers rumbled across the landscape, flattening or digging according to their individual function. Frank King watched approvingly as the JCB was manoeuvred into position, its great metal arms swinging down to scoop up a mound of earth. It then dumped into the back of a waiting lorry. The driver was sitting intently in the cab, smoking, and he waved to the King as the foreman passed, unable to hear King's comment about not straining himself because of the roar of machinery. Away to his right, King could see a group of men laying tarmac. Despite the chill in the air, they worked in shirt sleeves. Sweat was soaking through their clothes from the heat given off by the red-hot tar. The leisure centre itself was all but finished, an E-shaped 2-story building. It looked like something a child might fashion from plastic blocks. Painters still swarmed over it like so many overall-clad termites. Only these termites were busy applying coats of weatherproof paint. King stood a moment longer, surveying the activity, then turned and headed towards the yellow water cabin close by. On entering, he moved across to the welcoming warmth of a color gas heater and held his hands over it, meanwhile trying to catch the tail end of the phone conversation one of his colleagues was engaged in. John Kirkland was nodding as he held the phone, his mouth opening and closing like a goldfish as he struggled to get a word in. Finally, he held the receiver slightly away from his ear and cupped a hand over the mouthpiece. He looked up at King and shook his head as if signalling defeat. The other 4 men smiled. Another 3 or 4 minutes and Kirkland replaced the phone. Jesus, he muttered. Butler? King asked, grinning. Who else do you know who can talk non-stop for 20 minutes flat? Kirkland said. Picking up his mug of tea, he sipped it, wincing when he found that it was cold. What did he want? The usual. Is everything going according to schedule? Are we going to be finished on time? I don't know why he doesn't move his fucking desk out here so he can sit and watch. At least it did save him ringing up so often. Frank King chuckled and poured his colleagues a hot mug of tea, repeating the action for himself. I don't know what he's worried about, Kirkland said. We're ahead of schedule, if anything. He sipped some tea. Anyway, Butler reckons he's coming out of here this afternoon. Have a look for himself. He said something about flattening that wood. Kirkland tapped the map, which lay on the table before him. He wants to build on the land, extend the project. King peered through the window of the porter cabin, rubbing some grime away with his index finger. He could see the wood that Kirkland meant. It was a mile or so to the east of the main site, on a slight rise. More work, John, he said. None of us can turn our noses up at that. I'm not arguing with you, but things are going to get a bit crowded around here soon, he said, taking a sip of his tea. I mean, there's that archaeological dig going on over there, mentioned to the left, to the west. They've been at it for a while too. Knowing Cutler, I'm surprised he hasn't offered to build them a bloody museum. He laughed. His eyes were drawn once more to the dark outcrop of trees which grew so thickly to the east. The wood looked like a stain against the green of the hills. So bad. Chapter 4. It was Kim who felt the tremor first. Felt a slight vibration beneath her feet, and for a moment she paused, looking up at Philip Swampson, who seemed not to have noticed the movement. He was more concerned with unearthing a gold receptacle from the floor of the trench in which they both crouched. Kim waited a second longer, then began to help Swanson. It's gold, he said excitedly, some kind of ornamental bowl. They had uncovered the top half of the container when the second tremor came. Did you feel that? Kim asked, pressing the palm of one hand to the earth. Swanson nodded distractedly, apparently uninterested. No more than 10 yards away from them, a small rift opening in the earth. Loose dirt and gravel immediately began to tumble onto the loose cracks, which was widening with alarming speed and extending lengthwise along the trench they were working in. It was now less than 6 yards from them. Swanson dug carefully beneath the bowl, freeing it from the last clods of earth which held it captive. The crack in the ground was widening, yawning a full 6 feet across now and still lengthening. There was another vibration, so violent it rocked Kim on her heels, causing her to overbalance. As she fell to one side, she saw the rent in the earth, now only 2 or 3 feet from them. She shouted a warning to Swanson, But it was too late. It was as if the bottom of the trench had simply fallen away, crack open like a hungry mouth, and Kim realised with horror that she was falling in. Swanson too began slipping into the crack, which was now a gaping wound across the land. Kim clutched frantically at the side of the trench, digging her fingers into the earth in a desperate effort not to fall. There was nothing beneath her feet, and she gritted her teeth, trying to force from her mind thoughts of how deep the hole might be. Hutson also grabbed onto the ledge of the hard ground and felt his feet dangling in empty air. An icy cold blast of wind erupted from below them, and Kim sucked in an almost painful breath, fearing that the sudden uprush might cause her to lose her grip. God, they're about to fall. Now others were running to their aid. She saw Cooper sprinting toward the side of the trench. He dropped to his knees and thrust a hand down to her. Beside him, another man, whom she didn't recognize, was shining a torch past her down into the hole, trying to see just how deep it was. The light was swallowed up by the impenetrable blackness. The rift which had opened was obviously much deeper than anyone could have guessed. "Take my hand," Cooper urged, but Kim dared not release her grip on the earth ledge for her fear of falling. Boots dug into the sides of the hole, but only succeeded in dislodging some pieces of rock. In the amount of time they took to hit the bottom, it was painfully obvious that the hole was deep enough to cause serious injury, if not death, should either she or Swanson fall. "Somebody get a rope," yelled Cooper, straining to reach Kim's hand. He felt his powerful hand close over her wrist, and with lightning speed she gripped his forearm and clung tightly. He tried to pull her up, two of his colleagues holding on to him to prevent him from toppling head first into the black chasm. The veins on his forehead bulged as he used all his strength to haul her up, inch by inch. The wall of the trench started to collapse. Just small pieces of earth at first, and great clumps of it began to fall past Kim. Some of the fragments striking her as they disappeared into the gaping maw, which had now opened out into almost a circular pit. Cooper almost overbalanced, his grip on Kim's wrist loosening for an instant. She screamed as she slipped an inch or two, but Cooper regained his grip and began once more to haul her up the crumbling wall of the trench. Behind her, Swanson was muttering to himself, struggling to retain a handhold on earth. It was crumbling beneath his frantic fingers. Spade was lowered to him, and someone shouted to him to grab the handle, but he was afraid to release his hold on the ledge. His heart was hammering against his ribs, perspiration running in great salty rivulets down his face. He closed his eyes tightly for a moment, screwing them up until pain began to gnaw his forehead. A lump of earth the size of a fist came loose and hit him on the top of the head. He lost his grip. A woman standing on the side of the trench screamed as the archaeologist nailed with one hand, trying desperately to regain his hold. Kim heard his shout of terror as he sensed he was slipping away. He tightened her grip on Cooper's hand as he slowly dragged her upper body clear of the hole, aware that the trench wall would not hold out much longer. Ugh. His foot slipped and he almost overbalanced. Strong arms held him upright and he continued to drag Kim out. His legs finally cleared the hole, and with one last surge of strength, Cooper pulled her completely clear. Both of them fell back onto the earth, which was still crumbling beneath them. They rolled away, seeking firmer footing. Kim could hardly get a breath. She clambered to her feet and looked around. "Help me," shrieked Swanson, now clutching at the spade which was offered to him. He closed one desperate hand over the wooden shaft and clung on, knowing that his life depended on it. His would-be rescuers kept trying to drag him up, but his full weight, now dangling helplessly over the pit, was too much for them. "Where's that bloody rope?" shouted Cooper, running to get it from one of his colleagues. He fashioned it into a makeshift loop and lowered it towards Swanson. "Put your arm through the loop," he bellowed as the other end was secured to a tree stump. Hutson did as he told, though he hardly needed prompting. He grabbed the rope and tried to haul himself up. Kim watched helplessly as the three archaeologists pulled on the rope. Slowly, inch by inch, they started dragging Swanson clear. Oh my god. Oh. Picking up a torch, Kim shone it into the pit and saw that the hole was cylindrical, a tube of earth with smoothed sides. You daren't guess how deep it was. Swanson was more than half clear of the pit when the rope began to fray. At first, a handful of strands sprang from the hemp, then more. Hutson heard a creak as it unravelled quickly. No, he shrieked as the final strands came undone. The men holding the rope tried to pull him up faster, and flailing hands tried to catch him, but it was too late. Jesus. With a scream of fear, he plummeted from sight into the pit, a shout reverberating inside the shaft. Fuck. Kim closed her eyes, waiting for the thud as he hit the bottom. It never came. Instead, everyone near the pit froze as Swanson's shout suddenly changed into a bellow of unimaginable agony. Oh god, he's still alive. The sound amplified by the shaft was like a slap in the face. Oh god, murmured Kim. Exactly. And peering down into the darkness, but she could see nothing. The darkness of the body hid his body from sight. Had he broken his back, shattered his legs? If his skull had been pulped by the fall? Stunned by the roar of agony, the other archaeologists too stood gazing helplessly into the enveloping dark blackness. Now they all felt an icy breeze which seemed to rise from the pit, which became a choking smell, a pungent odour of decay, which made Kim cover her nose and mouth. He looked at Cooper, but he could only shake his head, wondering like the others what fate had befallen Swanson. Had he known the truth, he would have been glad that he could not see the body. God. Gonna take a few moments break before we go into chapter 5, but we're right back. Welcome back. Oh, God. What are we on now? Right. Chapter 5. The lights on the 2 police cars and the ambulance turned slightly, casting red and blue splashes of colour onto the faces of the people gathered around the deadly pit. No one spoke, and the whole scene reminded Kim of an extract from a silent film. Stood close to Cooper, mug of tea cradled in her hands, but the warm fluid was doing little to drive the chill from her bones. What she was feeling was not induced by the cold wind, it was the icy embrace of fear and shock, and it grabbed her tighter every time she looked at the hole into which Swanson had fallen. A couple of policemen were busy constructing a winch beside the pit. Watched by the crowd of onlookers, Kim brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face, noticing that her hand was still shaking. Cooper placed an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close in a gesture which suggested concern rather than affection. He took another sip of her tea and glanced across the open ground towards a grey Sierra, which was bouncing awkwardly over the dips and gullies in the earth as it approached the other vehicle. Kim watched as it came to a halt and the driver climbed out. He was tall, dressed in a suit which was stretched almost too tightly across his broad chest and back. Dark hair was uncombed and he ran a hand through it as he slammed the car door. A uniformed man approached the car and said something which Kim couldn't hear, but he mentioned in her direction and the newcomer nodded and headed towards her, casting a momentary glance past her toward the pit, where the winch had been all but secured. "Inspector Stephen Wallace," said the man in the suit, flipping open a slim leather wallet which he took from his inside pocket. Tim looked at the photo on the ID card, thinking it did the policeman scant justice. He was powerfully built, and his shirt collar looked painfully tight around his thick neck. As if reading her mind, he reached up and undid the top button, and relaxing slightly as he did so, he smiled reassuringly at Kim, who despite her condition found herself returning the gesture. "I already know what happened," he said to Cooper. "One of my men informed me over the radio. I'm sorry about Mr. Swanson." Cooper nodded. Wallace moved as close to the edge of the pit as he felt prudent, staring down into a seemingly bottomless maw. "Did you know this site was unstable?" he asked. "Certainly not," Cooper snapped. "We wouldn't have started work here." "Just asking," Wallace murmured quietly, and the uniformed man besides the winch gave a thumbs up, and the inspector walked around the shaft, guessing that the hole must have been at least 12 feet in diameter. He pulled off his jacket, handing it to another of the waiting constables, then turned it to the ambulance man. "I'll go down first," he said. "Check it out." He took a torch from one of his constables and held out his hand again. "Let me have that two-way." The harness, which dangled from the winch, was a piece of rope tied into a loop at the bottom. Wallace put one foot into it, gripping the hemp securely into it with his free hand, and lowered himself the first few feet into the darkness. He flicked on the torch, laying the powerful beam around the walls of the shaft. The rope creaked ominously as he was lowered. Foul stench filled his nostril, musty, cloying odour, which made him gasp for air. It was cold too, and the policeman shivered involuntarily, pointing the torch down it every now and then, in the hope of illuminating the bottom of the shaft. The beam was quickly swallowed by the gloom. He was lowered further, slowly, evenly. The smell was growing worse, and Wallace coughed, trying to breathe through his mouth to minimize its effects. The stench was making him lightheaded. 50 feet and still no sign of the bottom of the shaft. Anything yet, Gov? Anything yet, Gov? A voice on the two-way belonged to Sergeant Bill Dayton, and Wallace recognized it immediately. Nothing, he said, and coughed again. 70 feet. Wallace was beginning to wonder if his men had enough rope. How deep was this bloody hole? Cold, like the smell, seemed to be intensifying, so much so that the inspector was now shivering uncontrollably. And yet there was no breeze. The air was unmoving, like stagnant water in a blocked well. Jesus, these 7 just really far down. 80 feet. He shone the torch beneath him once more, and this time it picked something out. A few feet below, something was glistening. Nearly there, Wallace said into the two-way. "You see Swanson?" asked Cooper. "Not yet," he snapped his jaws together, cutting off the sentence. There were sounds of movement from below. Faint rustling sounds, almost imperceptible but nevertheless present, like what? Wallace thought. He swallowed hard and shoved the torch down once more. "Oh Jesus," he exclaimed. Another couple of feet and he'd reached the bottom of the shaft. Wallace stepped out of the harness and shone his torch forward, waving a hand in front of his nose to waft away the nauseating stench that filled his nostrils. He wished he could wipe away what he saw, too. God. There was a wooden spike in the centre of the pit, placed with almost mathematical precision, though it was in the very middle. The stake was fully 15 feet tall, tipped by a razor-sharp point, unblunted by the passage of time. Impaled on the spike, like an insect on a board, was Philip Hutson. Jesus. Spike has penetrated his back, just above the left scapula, tearing through his body before erupting from it at the junction of his right thigh and torso. He had landed on the spike with much momentum, but his body was almost touching the ground. Blood had sprayed everywhere, run in thick rivulets from his nose and mouth, gushed freely from his shattered groin and pumped in huge gouts from his stomach, which was torn open to reveal a tangle of internal organs, which looked on the point of breaking loose. Thick spurts of odorous green bile from the pulverized gallbladder had managed to mingle with the blood, which now caked thickly over the corpse in the base of the sharpened pole. There were fragments of broken bones scattered about. It's it's hailing out. There were fragments of broken bones scattered about. His arms dangled limply on either side of it. One of them attached only by the merest thread of skin and ligament. Mashed bone glistened whitely amidst the mess of flesh and blood. Wallace knelt close to the dangling head, hearing that strange rustling once more. It took him a second to realize that it was wind hissing through Swanson's pinching lungs. Wallace frowned. For that to be happening, the man had to be alive, but surely that was impossible. He lifted the head gently, looking at the bloody face. Swanson's eyes snapped open. In that split second, Wallace fell back, dropping the torch, stumbling in the blackness. He heard a thick, throaty gurgle, and realized it was Swanson's death rattle. "Shit," muttered the policeman, his heart thudding madly against his ribs. He wiped his face with one shaking hand, gradually regaining his composure. "Shit indeed, jeez. Oh, shit." Sorry, just taking a slight breather. "Wallace, are you alright?" He recognized Cooper's voice and found his radio. "Terrific," he said warily. "Peyton, can you hear me? Clear everybody away from the pit. Then get a stretcher down here." "On its way, Gov," Sergeant told him. Wallace shone his torch around the base of the shaft, looking at the objects which were scattered in all directions. Coins, weapons, jewellery, and bones. So many bones. As the beam fell on Swanson again, he quickly moved it away, playing it over the walls. He reached for the two-way, his eyes fixed ahead. "Cooper, you still there?" he said. A crackle of static. Then the archaeologist answered. "What is it?" "When the body's removed, you'd better come down here," the policeman said, the torch wavering slightly as he shone it ahead. The beam flickered for a second. "There's not something I think you should see." I have to take breaks every now and then just because I have some panic attack. These things kind of trigger me quite a bit. So, to breathe. I've dealt with this. I was very young. I haven't had panic attacks in a long time though, so, you know, I manage them pretty well. Just because I'm so fucking used to them. Just a matter of breathing and focusing on a point. And for anyone that does struggle with panic attacks like I do, or if you want to know how to help someone with panic attacks, well, just don't. Because only they can help themselves. And it's simply just finding a point, sitting down, breathing in through the nose, and then out through the mouth, and just focusing on breathing. Which is what I'm doing right now. Funny that I chose this book. Because I know before, last time I tried to read it, I had a panic attack. I'm like, well, last time I tried to read it on my own, I had a panic attack. I'm only on chapter 6 and there's like, how many chapters? There is 67 chapters. Yeah. I'm gonna have to take a long breather for a second before I go on to chapter 6. Just so I can ground myself. Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay. I'll take a sip of tea and then I'll continue. Chapter 6. He didn't time it, but Wallace guessed that it took him and the ambulance-man almost 20 minutes to remove Philip Swanson's body from the wooden stake. As the body was finally pulled through, the left arm came loose and What? Fell with a dull thud. The ambulance-man laid it alongside the body and carefully wrapped the remains in a thick blanket and secured the bold grisly package to a stretcher with a rope. On Wallace's order, the corpse was winched up along with the ambulance-man. The two of them had spoken little during their vile task. The ambulance-man, in particular, seemed glad to be away from the cloying blackness of the pit, and as he was winched up towards the light again, he did not look down. Now the ambulance-man stood alone, wishing he had a cigarette, not only to calm his nerves, but also to mask the rancid stench which filled the shaft. He rummaged in his trouser pockets and found half a thick of chewing gum. It would have to do for now. He shunned the torch over the floor of the pit, realizing at last how many strange objects lay around him. For his untrained eye, it reminded him of some ancient rubbish tip. Articles of all shapes and sizes were scattered in all directions around the base of the stake. The roving beam illuminated a skull, the jaws open in a soundless scream. There was a large hole in it just above the crown. Another lay beside it, and another. All bore jagged cracks or hollows. But it was beyond the mounds of bones and relics that Wallace finally allowed the torch beam to rest. What would Cooper and the others make of this? He chewed his gum thoughtfully, glanced up. The pit's depth prevented any natural light from reaching the bottom, and it also cut out any sounds from the combination of deathly silence and unyielding darkness was a formidable one, and there was the ever-present smell too, an odour of decay which clutched at Wallace's throat like an invisible spectre. A few feet above him he heard something move. He aimed his torch up into the gloom. Cooper was descending on the winch. With him was the young woman Wallace knew as Kim Nicol. She had a firm hold on the rope and looked unperturbed by the sight which faced her. Even when she glanced at the bloodied wooden stake, she didn't flinch. Wallace watched her for a moment, offering his hand as she stepped out of the harness. There was a warmth in her touch, which contrasted sharply with the bone-numbing cold in the shaft. "You don't need an explanation, do you?" said Wallace, motioning towards the stake. Cooper shook his head. Kim shuddered and looked away, thinking how easily she could have been the one to suffer Swanson's agonizing death. But that thought was pushed aside as she saw the piles of artifacts before her. Cooper too was staring in awe at the array of which faced him. He bent and picked up a short sword, the blade dulled but still remarkably well preserved considering its age. Flecks of rust had formed around the tip. Apart from that, the weapon looks surprisingly sturdy. Kim found a number of large bowls, some gold, some iron. He was more interested in the bones, skulls, femurs, tibias, pelvic bones, here and there complete skeletons. The place was carpeted with them. "Sacrificial well," said Cooper excitedly. Wallace continued chewing slowly, watching the two archaeologists. "That would explain the bones," Kim nodded. "I don't get it," Wallace said. "The shaft and the wooden stake were put here by Celtic tribes thousands of years ago," explained Cooper. "Offerings like these coins and weapons," added Kim, "were thrown in to please their gods. There were human beings, prisoners of war, lunatics, and sacrificial victims from the tribe were all thrown down here in the hope of gaining favour, whichever deity was being worshipped." "I'm sure Philip Swanson would have been pleased to hear that," Wallace said acidly. "You don't understand the importance of this find, Wallace," Cooper snapped. "It's unfortunate that Swanson is dead, but it was an accident. What do you expect us to do?" Was a sight as mark of respect? There was scorn in his voice. Wallace turned away, pointing the torch at the far wall of the pit. What do you make of that? Cooper, who had been crouching close to the wooden stake, looked up. His jaw dropped. He got slowly to his feet and waddled across to the policeman, closely followed by Kim. The three of them stood mesmerized by the sight that faced them. Two large, almost perfectly circular stones were propped against the smooth wall of the shaft. Spread-eagled on each one was a skeleton, iron spikes fully 10 inches long, had been driven through the wrist and feet of each one. The mouths were open, as if skeletons were still screaming. More of the iron spikes had been driven through the eye sockets of each one, nailing the head to the stone behind it. Whoa. Were they thrown in there like that? Wallace asked. Because if they weren't, then whoever nailed them up died down here with them. Criminals, said Cooper quietly. To have suffered punishment like that, they must have transgressed against the tribe itself. These stones, Kim said, looking one finger behind the rock closer to her. They're like gates. There's something behind them. She peered through the narrow gap into the odorous gloom beyond. It looks like a tunnel of some kind. I'm going to leave you to it, said Wallace. After all, I'm a Cooper. I'm a copper, not an archaeologist. I've done my bit. Cooper nodded perfunctorily, more interested in the finds. Thank you, Kim said as Wallace gripped his one harness. I made it a statement from you, Miss Nichols, he said, when you've finished. She nodded and smiled. The rope and Wallace began to rise. That chapter. Gonna take another moment to breathe. Hey. Well, I'm not a cat, but thank you. Tootsie Roll. I could use it. I'm a fox. I'm a fox, baby. Yeah, thanks, Goliath. This one's been really difficult for me because I'm, well, pretty much having to take a breather after every chapter. Oh, was that Buster? Yeah, I'm right, Goliath. Um, so this kind of the book that I'm reading, it's really horrific. Um, and there are certain triggers that set off my anxiety. Well, not anxiety, panic attacks. So taking just like slight breathers to get through the book. I really do enjoy the book though. It's just I can't help that I've got certain things that make me have panic attacks. So I want to get through it. Just, you know. And it's nothing too bad. It's I can deal with it because I've dealt with it since I was like really young. And it's just a matter of breathing. Really. It's just something that I deal with. Wish I didn't, to be honest, but because it's not fun. It ruins certain things that I want to enjoy, but I am enjoying the book. I got to chapter 7. I'm going to continue after I've calmed down just a little bit. I might continue now. They did just take like 10 minutes. Okay. Chapter 7. Frank King double-checked that the handbrake of the Land Rover would hold on the sharp incline. Ooh. And then he and John Kirkland clambered out. From where they stood, the building site was clearly visible away to the west. The wood stood defiantly before them, its trees jammed tightly together as if to form a barrier to any who might wish to enter. As the two men pushed their way through the chest-high bushes which grew on the perimeter, Kirkland cursed the brambles that cut his flesh. One particularly long hawthorn spike dug deeply into the back of his right hand, drawing blood, and he winced in pain. Why the bloody hell couldn't Cutler have come up here himself, he snarled, wiping the crimson droplets away with his handkerchief. I mean, if he wants the wood levelled, fair enough. All we have to do is send a dozen blokes up here with chainsaws, then bulldoze the whole lot when they've finished. It seems like such a waste. It seems like such a waste, doesn't it? Said King, looking around at the ancient trees which towered over them like sentinels, flattening this lot. Come on, Frank. You don't have a fit for environmental conscience now, Kirkland said, tugging himself free of a clinging gorse bush. The foreman smiled. There should be a few £1,000 worth of paper here, he said, tapping the trunk of one tree. As the men moved deeper into the wood, King noticed how dark it was becoming. Despite the scarcity of leaves on the branches,
The trees still seemed to be blocking out a great deal of natural light. King wondered how many of the mosses and lichens which carpeted the floor of the wood managed to grow. King wondered how any of the mosses and lichens which carpeted the floor of the wood managed to grow. He kicked a rotted tree stump aside, stepping back in revulsion as he saw dozens of wood lice spilling from the Hulk-like maggots from a festering wound. 2 or 3 extremely large ground spiders also scuttled into view. Kirkland crushed one beneath his foot. Ahead of them was a clearing, 20 or 30 yards in diameter, and here the ground was covered by a blanket of brown leaves. They crackled noisily as the 2 men walked over them. King stopped in the centre of the treeless area, relieved to be free of the dark confines of the dense wood. He was beginning to feel quite claustrophobic. High above them, the sky was the colour of wet concrete, and a gathering of black clouds to the north promised rain. Kirkland kicked away some of the dead leaves and dug the toe of his boot into the earth, picking up a large clod.
The foundations are going to have to be laid deep if Cutler wants us to build here, he said, sucking at the small cut on his hand. He bent down and picked up a handful of the moist topsoil, banging it over in his hand, prodding the dark matter, and then finally dropping it.
His palms were stained a deep rusty red, the colour of dried blood. Kirkland rubbed his hands together,
trying to wipe away the stain.
He smelt a musty odour and coughed. The ground around his feet was also tinged dark red. The trees rattled noisily in the wind as the 2 men turned to make their way back. "The sooner Lissos flatten, the better," said Kirkland, rubbing his hands on his overalls. As they left the clearing, the gloom closed around them again. The end of the chapter. Mm. Oh, I'm gonna take another slight break. Um, I'll be right back. Oh, okay. Hmm. This is this is pretty good for me because I don't speak. Um, my ability to speak is not as in if I speak for a period of time, even after half an hour of notice, it gets difficult. Actually, speak. Hey, double bay, boo. How's it going? I'm reading a book.
I'm describing how this is pretty good for me. Reading aloud is not something I often do. Helps me to speak because I don't speak very well. Believe it or not. Sustained speaking really, like, properly exhausts me. And right now I can already feel my jaw hurts and my throat hurts a little bit. Ooh, nice. Well, I'm reading a book. I'm doing alright. I'm reading a pretty horrific book. I'm reading a pretty horrific book that I have to take breaks in between reading chapters because panic attacks and stuff, but still good. Yeah, I mean it's in my title, but I can type it in. It's from Shaun Hutson. Hey zombie, how's it going? Shaun Hutson. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in the title. I always put things that are playing in the title so people know what they're getting into. There's not just the thing at the bottom telling people what. What's up, zombie? I'm only gonna keep reading this for like maybe another half hour because I'm already my voice is already strained. But I would like to do more of this. If people would be interested in me reading a book every now and then. This is the first time me doing this. I'm just testing it out.
And what better way to test it out with a horrific book like Shaun Hutson Relics? Right. You guys don't mind, I'm going to continue reading. We're on chapter 8. What sort of rock is it? Kim asked, watching as George Perry used a chisel to shave off a piece of the slab. Perry held the lantern over it and prodded the powdery rock with one finger. It looks like limestone, he said. It would have to be reasonably soft to pick those nails, he mentioned to the circles of stones with the skeletons spread-eagled upon them. And they shouldn't be too difficult to move, Burr said excitedly. The gas lamps cast a dull yellow glow around the base of the pit, illuminating the host of artifacts and bones that littered the sacrificial well. Many of the objects had already been removed for analysis. Three or four of the team were packing them carefully into the back of the Land Rover, which would transport them into Langfield. As yet, none of the bones had been touched. Cooper stepped forward, dug his fingers into the soil behind the edge of one of the circular rocks, grasped the rock and braced his shoulder against it. George Perry added his considerable bulk to the effort, and they were joined by a third man, whom Kim recognized as Ian Russell. Perry was a grey-haired individual. Despite the chill inside the subterranean chamber, dark rings of sweat were visible beneath his armpits.
Kim directed the beam of his powerful torch at the rock and watched as the trio of men braced themselves at a single signal from Cooper. They began to tug on the stone. Gritting his teeth, Cooper pulled as hard as he could, feeling a slight movement. The other two men also noticed that the stone was beginning to shift, and they redoubled their efforts. 1 inch, 2 inches. The concerted effort was working. 3 inches. Several small fragments of the rock broke off and fell to the ground, and Perry found that he was losing his handhold. He swiftly dug his hands and digged behind the stone once more, scraping his palms as he did so. 6 inches. Kim stepped forward, aiming the torch beam into the blackness behind the monolith. 8 inches. Russell grunted in pain as his fingers slipped and part of his nail was torn away as the cuticle. Oh. A dark globule of blood welled up and dripped from the end of the digit.
1 foot, and they still heaved, trying to clear a gap large enough to squeeze through. The skeleton suspended on the rock shuddered slightly as the great stone was moved. 2 of the fingers broke off and dropped to the ground. Cooper, his face sheathed in sweat, finding it difficult to get his breath. The effort of moving the rock was overexerting his strength. The cloying atmosphere inside the shaft wasn't helping. "Stop," he grunted, and the other 10 carefully released their hold on the stone.
Reaching out to his pocket, Russell pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed up the blood from his injured finger. He seemed more concerned with what lay behind the rock than with his own discomfort. No. Cooper took the torch from Kim and stood by the entrance they had unblocked. The gap was large enough to admit him now, but he hesitated, shining the torch beam through the blackness to what lay beyond. It was a tunnel.
As Cooper stood there, he felt the beads of perspiration on his forehead turning cold, as if the icy breeze were freezing them into dozens of crystal beads. He didn't move. Kim looked at him and frowned, wondering why the archaeologist didn't advance into the tunnel. He'd been so eager to discover its secrets that she could not understand why he should hesitate now. Hesitate now. She sucked in a startled breath as the muscles in her body suddenly seemed to spasm, as if some powerful electric current were being pulled through her for long seconds. The feeling passed, and then she was aware of a rancid stench, much more powerful than that in the shaft. It was carried on no breeze, simply hung in the air, like a noxious, invisible blanket. Perry coughed and covered his face with one hand. For what seemed like an eternity, no one moved. Finally, as if suddenly galvanized into action, Rupert eased his way through the gap into the waiting tunnel. The ground was surprisingly soft beneath his feet, clay-like in consistency. The walls, too, were porous, almost clammy to the touch. "There must be a lot of moisture in this soil," said Kim, following him inside, touching the wall with her fingers.
"It's amazing," said Perry. There don't appear to be any stanchions to support the tunnel roof, and yet it seemed solid. The Celts were very skilled builders and architects, Cooper reminded him. You only have to look at the brooch of Mido to realise that. The Brock. The Brock, Russell said. It's a stone tower in the Orkneys, Jim told him, said to have been built by the Celts over 2,000 years ago. Ahead of her, Cooper found that the tunnel was curving to the right, less than 4 feet wide in places. Narrowness forced the archaeologist to walk in single file. Kim touched the wall closest to him. closest to her and found that in places droplets of moisture were forming and running like dirty tears down the wall.
Cooper stopped. There was another tunnel leading off to the left. Which one do we take? Asked Perry. We could split up, Russell suggested. No, Cooper said. There's no telling how deep these networks go, or how complex they become. We'll stay together for the time being. They moved on. Kim saw her breath clouding in the air, and she shuddered as the numbing cold seemed to penetrate her bones,
freezing the marrow until her whole body felt as if it was stiffening.
She found it an effort to lift her feet. Ahead of her, she saw that Cooper too was slowing his pace. It was as if they were walking into a high wind, battling against the force of some powerful blast of air. But there was no movement in the air. The atmosphere remained still and as stagnant as filthy pond water. The stench and the cold closed around them like a reeking glove, squeezing more tightly until each of them was gasping for breath. Cooper stopped and pulled a box of matches from his pocket. He lit one and held it up. The flame did not move, not a flicker either way. In seconds the match burnt out, as if there wasn't enough oxygen in the foul atmosphere to sustain it.
Didn't one of us go back and tell the others what's happening? Russell suggested. Cooper agreed. We'll push on and see if we can find the end of the tunnel, he said. You go back. Russell nodded, flicked on his torch, and retreated down the narrow tunnel. Within seconds the light was enveloped by the blackness. He became invisible to his 3 colleagues. Come on, Cooper said, noticing that the tunnel turned to the right again, more sharply this time. Kim sensed that it was also getting narrower. She put out her hand and touched both sides with ease, recoiling slightly from the clammy, moist feel of the wall. How much further? Perry murmured warily. We must have come further 500 or 600 yards already. The cows didn't usually build labyrinths like this, did they? Said Kim, not sure whether it was a question or a statement.
The hill fort's very complex, but I've never seen anything like this under the ground, Cooper confessed. The tunnel widened slightly, turning an almost 90-degree bend. The 3 archaeologists came around the corner virtually together, a sight which made them stop them in their tracks.
Ooh.
That's the end of chapter 8. Oh.
Just gonna take another slight break. Breather break, breather break.
I might read. I think I might read this 10th. No. Yeah. Okay. I'll read 9 and 10, and then I'll leave it there. I think 10 chapters every stream would be good. It takes me a while to get through this. Just get through this book. Okay. Chapter 9. Chapter 9.
The skeletons were piled six deep in places. The bones, blackened by the ages, lay lengthways across the tunnel, like a mouldering barrier, preventing the archaeologists from moving any further. Cooper shone his torch over the macabre find, overawed by the sheer number of ancient forms. Kim took a faltering step forward, kneeling beside the closest one. Cooper joined her, muttering to himself as the torch beam flickered once more. This kind of mass burial wasn't normal Celtic practice, Kim said, quietly, as if reluctant to disturb the unnatural silence around them. Even as she spoke, her voice seemed muffled, stifled by the choking smell and the almost palpable darkness. There must be hundreds of them. They look like children's bones, said George Perry, noticing, like his companions, that not one of the skeletons was more than about 3 feet in height. Tim prodded one with the end of a pencil, hearing the lead scrape along with the pen, like fingernails on a blackboard.
Harry looked down at the skeletons past them,
the beam of his torch catching a larger object. It was another barrier, this time stone covered with rancid moss, its surface mottled by the few lichens that had managed to survive its fetid atmosphere. Harry was about to say something when Cooper stood up and spoke, a note of urgency in his voice. We need to examine these bones as soon as possible, he said. We also need some light down here. George, see if you can rig up a generator on the surface. We can run cables down here and fix some lights so we can see what we're doing. Kim had remained silent, and now she got slowly to her feet, eyes fixed on a pile of bones before her.
When she spoke, her voice was low, subdued. I think George is right. They are children's skeletons. Where are the heads?
Oh God. Okay, that's the end of chapter 9.
Chapter 10's a bit of a long one.
I'll take one last breather and then I'll finish this off.
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh.
Chapter 10. The dog snarled as the chain was pulled tight around its neck. It wore a heavy muzzle over its jaws, and thick white saliva hung like gluttonous streamers from its teeth. The dog was a bull terrier, small and stockily built, but possessing tremendous strength.
Its black body was slightly more streamlined than average, but it lacked none of the musculature which made the breed so powerful. As it tugged on its chain, the hair at the back of its neck rose in anticipation. "Keep still, you bastard," snapped Rob Hardy, jerking the chain once more, almost pulling the dog over. Jeez.
As he spoke, Hardy looked past the men near him, to where another group of men were gathered, and amongst them he recognized Vic Regis. He was also holding a dog, another terrier, brindle dog, which was slightly smaller than Hardy's but no less ferocious in appearance. It too resembled a spring about to uncoil, tremendous ferocity. The dog was making little noise except for the low breathing which Hardy could hear. It reminded him of damaged bellows. Another man sat on one of the hay bales which had been used to construct the makeshift arena. He was in his
early 30s, tall and thin-faced with a pitted complexion, and dark stubble which defied even the sharpest razor. His eyebrows were also thick and bushy and met above the bridge to his nose, giving him the appearance of perpetually frowning. He was holding a thick wad of money in his tattooed hand. "Vic wants to lay a side bet of 50 quid, said Mick Ferguson, scratching one cheek with the rolled up cash, but just between you and him." "I'll cover it," said Hardy without hesitation. "I've been training this dog for 3 months. Even I'm scared of him." Ferguson laughed and held out his hand for the 10 fivers, which Hardy pulled from his pocket. "Are you in for a slice of that too?" Hardy asked. "What do you think?" Ferguson said. "I set up these little shows, don't I? I reckon these entitles me to some of the proceeds." He looked at his watch. "Come on, let's get started."
Ferguson got to his feet and walked to the center of the fighting area. The old barn smelled of damp straw and neglect, mingling with the more pungent odor of sweat from both humans and animal. He guessed that there was a dozen other men besides himself in the dilapidated barn. Its beams were seething with woodworm and the roof leaked when it rained. But the place was perfect for its present purpose. It was about 3 miles out of town and half a mile from the nearest road. Motorists driving to and from Longfield came nowhere near it. Anyone who thought of turning into the old dirt track was usually discouraged by the sign on the heavy gate which proclaimed "Private Keep Out." Ferguson thought how lucky he had been to find this place. Until then, he hadn't dared to stage dogfights within a 20-mile radius of Longfield. The coppers in there knew him well enough already.
He'd done a 2-year stretch in strange ways for theft and another 6 months for receiving. It also lifted him for GBH on one occasion, but the case had been dismissed for lack of evidence.
The idea of dogfighting had come to him after attending a coursing meet one Sunday morning. Two of the greyhounds, after killing the hare, had begun fighting between themselves, and one had been blinded in the ensuing battle.
It had been only a small step from getting the idea to organising things properly. He creamed off 60% of the take for himself. The rest was used to pay back bets and give the winning dog owner a few bob.
Ferguson had 2 animals of his own, but he would not unleash them in the arena until he felt the time was right. He'd bred them himself, mating a dog with a bitch from the dog himself had fathered. This incestuous interbreeding had spawned another litter of six, four of which had been blind or deformed. Those were useless to Ferguson, and he'd taken them straight from their mother. Oh, Jesus. Content warning. Ferguson, and he'd taken them straight from their mother, still dripping from the womb. And, God, this is going to be difficult for me to, can't. Basically, you drown them.
Drown them in the bucket of water. The other two, though, were savage beyond belief, and as such, perfect for his needs. He kept them in cages in the cellar of his house, feeding them on the best meat he could afford, training them, moulding them into perfect killing machine. Soon they would be ready, and they'd clean up with side bets.
Okay. Ferguson stood in the middle of the barn. The spectators scuttled to find the best advantage. Hay bales not used to construct the fighting area itself were hurriedly employed as seats, and a hush descended as Regis and Hardy led their dogs forward. As they drew closer to each other, the animals began snarling, straining in their eagerness to fight. Both men removed the restraining muzzles, and a cacophony of loud barking filled the barn. Let them go, said Ferguson quietly. As the collars were tugged free, the dogs hurled themselves at each other, all their pent-up fury now finding vent. Oh my god, okay.
This goes into heavy descriptions of dogs being hurt, so, you know, content warning again. Oh.
Ferguson, Regis, and Hardy bolted to safety behind the low barrier of hay bales, and turned to watch as the two animals locked jaws. The sound of barking was replaced by a succession of snarls and growls of anger and pain. The brindle dog gripped the black terrier's bottom jaw and pulled. Hey, tearing away a long sliver of skin from its lower lip, the larger animal pulled loose and lunged at its opponent's head. It snapped off the end of one ear as easily as its shears cutting through grass, and the taste of blood seemed to inflame it even more. Like two steam trains crashing head-on, the dogs smashed into one another again. And this time, the smaller dog succeeded in fastening its jaws on the other's shoulder. Powerful neck muscles tensed as it pulled the black dog down, ripping a sizable chunk of the skin and fur free. The larger dog drew back slightly. The respite was short. Two dogs locked jaw once more, scrabbling with their paws to get a grip of the free ground. There was a loud crack as the brindle dog broke up a tooth.
Oh man, okay.
Ferguson rolled a cigarette as he watched, apparently oblivious to the shouts of the other men. A thick roll of notes nestled comfortably in his trouser pocket. He lit up the cigarette and drew on it. The black terrier lunged forward, managed to bury its powerful canine teeth in the back leg of its opponent, but in doing so it exposed its own sleek side to the back. Another animal was not slow to respond. It fastened its jaws firmly into the bigger dog and began shaking its head back and forth. Oh, this isn't fun. Blood from both animals began to fly through the air, and the ground beneath them turned to crimson. Vic Regis grunted indignantly. Several hot red droplets splashed at his face. He hurriedly wiped them away.
Brindle Terrier drew back an inch or two and then bit down even harder, chewing into the side of its opponent, causing it to loosen its grip. The bigger dog struck at the other animal's head. Its despairing lunge caught the brindle below in an eye, one razor-sharp tooth gouging up through the eyeball. Both dogs drew back, and Rob Hardy cursed as he saw a gleaming fragment of bone sticking through the corpse in torn mess. Oh, that was his dog's side. Each time exhaled, a dribble of thick red foam spilled from its nostrils. Ugh. Similarly, Regis saw that this brindle dog had been blinded in one eye, its face a mask of blood and sputum. The savage wound on its back leg was also bleeding profusely. "Do you want to call it off?" Ferguson said. "No way," snapped Regis.
God damn, Regis, you fucker. Hardy agreed. Before either of them could speak again, the dogs joined in battle once more. Oh man. Okay.
Caught on its blind side, the brindle dog saw the charge too late, and the other terrier managed to drive its teeth into the fleshy part of its opponent's neck.
There was a bright red explosion and the vein was severed. Blood spurted high into the air, and soon the smaller dog began to weaken. The barn stank of blood. The crimson fluid was everywhere. On the floor, the hay bales. The spectators even on the walls in one or two places. Jesus. Right, that's it, shouted Regis. Get your fucking dog off. He glared at Hardy, who smiled and clambered into the makeshift arena. Okay. There might have been a slight chance of saving the defeated animal's life, if anyone had been so inclined, but those watching were too busy complaining or rejoicing, depending on which dog they'd backed. When he gripped the black terrier by the back of the neck and pulled it away from the stricken brindle dog. Useless fucker, snapped Regis, looking down at the dying animal. I've lost over 100 weight because of you. Jeez. With a savagery born of anger, he kicked the ravaged dog in his stomach. This is one hell of a fucked up chapter to leave it on. It raised its head weakly as if pleading for help, but Regis was unimpressed.
Ferguson joined the two men, stepping over the fatally wounded brindle dog. He handed a bundle of notes to Hardy, who quickly pocketed them. Regis, muttering to himself, stalked off to the far side of the barn and returned a moment later carrying the pitchfork they had used to move the hay bales. I'm not going to read the next couple of lines, but they basically just killed the dog. Well, that actually got me to cry a bit. Ugh. Okay, never mind, Vic, he said, grinning. You can't win them all. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that was a fucking terrible fucking chapter to leave off on, but oh my god. Oh. Ugh. Yeah, I don't like that. I did say this book was a bit fucked up. Probably should have started off with a lighter book, not gonna lie. This is definitely a heavy read. I'm sure someone else could probably handle this better, but oof. It took a lot out of me. I want to thank everyone that popped in, and I know people didn't stick around for very long because, I mean, I don't blame them. I will hopefully do this again. And now I'm gonna take a chill pill for a bit. Because I am very emotionally drained right now from that. Yeah, so thanks to everyone that popped in. I might do another stream at some point today as well. Because this was a little bit short. But you know, not anytime soon. It'll be like a couple hours away, so I can, you know, take a breather. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day, night, morning, evening, whatever. Yeah, bye bye.